Hi everyone, in today's video, it's actually going to be quite important because I have a thesis as to why the markets, in my opinion, the next few trading days / week or so is going to start heading down. Not specifically tomorrow because Nvidia reported earnings and it was better than expected, so on and so forth. So this applies more for the fact after tomorrow or / within the next week. But I'm going to go over investor sentiment, the Fed, what they mentioned in terms of meeting minutes, inflation numbers for the past 12 months, and further actually economic calendar, 10-year treasury, analysis of the S&P 500, Nasdaq, and the Dow Jones as well this time. I usually post these videos pretty much every single day. So if you do want to be notified when I do upload them, consider subscribing to be notified when I do upload them. But this one is going to be the most detailed one. Usually they're just analysis of the S&P 500 and Nasdaq and economic calendar. But this one is going to be more detailed because in my opinion, I think the market's going to be heading down. So I want to show the whole entire aspect, if that makes sense. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. Hope you guys like it. If you do find it beneficial towards the end, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel. So thank you so much for that. First, before I get into the economic calendar and everything else, I just want to show the Dow Jones. Now the Dow Jones is basically 30 stocks that are blue chip stocks that are massive. And in essence, this dates back since, when was it? 2021, right? We have this upward trend resistance line channel and upward trend support level, right? Creating a channel, and we're reaching this point. But if you zoom in to, let's say, 3 months, you can see we've already hit it. And then, yeah, a couple of times false breakup, but my lines are not necessarily perfect, right? But we're heading down hypothetically. Now, for the short term, like I stated, for today / or tomorrow, because of Nasdaq in terms of earnings that they've reported, we could be reversing to the upside a little bit. But ultimately, I think heading down, right? If we go into let's go into the 5-year. The 5-year potentially was going to reverse to the upside, right? But it's curving back down potentially. This is MAC line showing the movement overall. But then the 1-year, so more closer term reverses the long term. MAC line looks like projecting to the downside. Now the reason why I'm covering this is because for the Dow Jones, I would say for the movement overall, because these are more larger cap stocks, these will be ultimately, in a way, trajectory for the way the market's moving more. Like in terms of the major movement, I think this would dictate it more, as opposed to, for example, 500 stocks, yes, but that averages it out. This would be the stocks that carry the market, if I'm not mistaken. By the way, I'm not a professional, so please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. Now, if we get into the 6 month, it shows in the bearish movement, so more downside. Again, we could be bouncing off the moving average. Right now, we're at 39,671 points, right? And the bounce off the moving average about 39,550 points. So we could potentially bounce off it. But from what this Fed stated, and in terms of inflation numbers I'll show later on, I don't think that'll necessarily be the case. Short-term wise, yeah, we'll bounce off it. Technically, you can see by the candle, technically we have bounced off it, right? And given the way Nvidia earnings went, tomorrow could be the bounce off, right? But I think ultimately it's going to be a false bounce, like a false bounce to the upside and then come back down. But we shall see. 3 month bearish movement going to the downside, and then I think the 1 month, which is more shorter term, is to the upside, which is the bounce itself hypothetically. But within the short terms, there's no real moving averages that it could really bounce off. We got the 1 month, and the bounce off is like pretty low. The 3 month, I think, coming up shortly, and then the 6 month, it's on it right now. So again, in my opinion, I think it's more the fake outs bouncing off. We already had a double fake out right here to pass the upward trend resistance line. Did not do it. We could go up again, potentially. I just don't think so based off what the Fed stated today. Now, today we had the FOMC meeting at 2 p.m. Today is May 22nd, 2024. And essentially what they stated was they need to see more evidence as in terms of inflation numbers coming down. Then they'll decide to reduce interest rates, right? The only problem is it almost seems like now more of the case, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, the market wants one interest rate cut this year, but it seems more of the case that we might not get one, right? And they kind of made it clear that it's going to be delayed. Now, basically, it could still happen by the end of the year, but if you look at inflation numbers, right about here, so this dates back since 2004. Right now, yeah, we've came down, and in one of the videos, I thought I saw something 2.8 or something like that, and in that video, I stated that it was 3.8, and I think I commented underneath, I think I saw 3.4 in the video I mentioned, something like that. But in the comments below, I think I commented it was 2.8. I don't know where I got that 2.8 from, but this is actually it. And it's at 3.4 right now. So the Fed wants to get to 2%. If they want to get to 2% and it slightly rose, then for example, from January to February, and then March it was at 3.5, and yeah, a little bit dipped at 3.4 in April, but we're still higher from the beginning of the year. So I don't see a reason for them to cut interest rates if they're trying to get to 2% inflation. They mentioned that their policies might not be potentially tight enough hypothetically. So there's a potential that I wouldn't say they would increase interest rates, just because Jerome Powell stated 2 times recently that in his opinion, that the next rate move, when it happens in terms of an actual rate move, not the rate decision, it will be more towards the downside, so a rate cut rather than a rate increase. So because of that, I think the market just won't get what they want. And because of that, hypothetically, potentially the market could be assuming there's like hypothetically, not necessarily doom and gloom, but where if they're not getting what they want, they'll just keep heading down hypothetically. And in terms of investor sentiment, right now, it is still quite bullish, right? Historical average is at 37.5%. And as of 5/15, so May 15, 2024, we're at 40.9. So we are higher. But the thing is, though, in terms of investor sentiment, it's not necessarily always the right direction, right? There will be a reversal unknown, and I'm going to go over the VIX as well to show volatility index. It is low at the moment, so upside could still happen, but at one point it could be flipping, and when it flips, the volatility could spike quite rapidly, if that makes sense. In terms of bullish movement or bearish sentiment, it is decreasing a little bit. So 23.3, previously is 23.8. And then historical average is about 31.0%. So the market is optimistic. I'm curious how much optimistic it will be in the next report, because again, this is May 15, 2024. Given what the Fed stated, plus inflation numbers necessarily not being at 2%, correlation to what they stated, I think there's a tendency more to the downside, especially if you're looking at the Dow Jones in terms of direction. The only thing is, though, I think tomorrow might be going up, just because, for example, NVIDIA, right now, they close at $949.50, but we're looking at $985.62. So that will be, in my opinion, carrying the market tomorrow. But then after the fact, it could be heading down based off the trajectory of the Dow Jones. Now, I'm going to go over the S&P 500 and Nasdaq right after, but I want to go over the economic calendar first. And then also I want to mention next week, one thing to pay attention to in terms of inflation numbers, May 31st on a Friday, we have PCE numbers, which is the Fed's actual inflation, the most accurate, hypothetically, inflation numbers from in terms of Fed calculations. So be on the lookout for that for next week. So maybe it could be triggered next week, we can start heading down. So even though we're heading up, just to show for the Dow Jones, where is it? For the Dow Jones right about here. Yeah, we might be heading back up, maybe test one more time, but ultimately heading down potentially, given that the 1 year, in terms of MACD line, showing to the downside, crossing over to the bearish movement, and then heading potentially down to these lower levels, right? So we've had head over down to these lower levels. One time bounced almost, but not necessarily bounced here. And then to get to these lower levels, just let's say at least meeting the moving averages, or let's get to this level, about 37,979 points, right? Again, we're at 39,671. So 37,979 points to get to this level, give or take. And if we were to get to that upward trend support level fully, we're looking at 37,573 points, depending on when you hit it though, right? So there's that. Now, in terms of the economic calendar for tomorrow, we have, where is it? So Thursday, May 23rd at 8:30 a.m., we have initial jobless claims. And that is important because the Fed looks into that as well. 9:45 a.m., we have S&P Flash U.S. Services PMI, and then we have S&P Flash U.S. Manufacturing PMI, and then at 10 a.m., we have new home sales, and then at 3 p.m., we have Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic speak. So decent amount of stuff coming out for tomorrow, and then as well as U.S. Treasury slightly rising for the time being, slightly, not too much, but we're at 4.426%. So I'm curious if this is going to rise throughout the trading days coming up. Now, in terms of the S&P 500, we have, I'm going to look at the SPY, which is the same thing, just basically multiples. And then for the new viewers, just so you guys are aware of, technically this would show to a little bit more to the upside. We have more room. But for the Nasdaq, we're approaching the high. Actually, maybe I should cover the Nasdaq. I'll cover the Nasdaq after. But for the Nasdaq, we're approaching the limit as well. So it kind of coincides with the Dow Jones too. So more of a reason why potentially we could be heading down. But for the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, they kind of show there is more room to grow in a way. So it kind of contradicts the Dow Jones, but I think the pull will still happen. Again, this is just my thesis in my opinion. So please do your own due diligence and research before buying some. Now for the new viewers, this is a channel dating back since 2010. Upward trend resistance line, upward trend support level, and then major crashes, upward trend support level. And you can see we have a lot of room to go to the upside. Potential false breakout here, but if you go to the 5-year chart, it's trying to cross over to a bullish movement. Maybe arching down, debatable. Same like the Dow Jones almost, but not necessarily. This one's more stronger to potentially cross over. But then the 1 year also potentially crossing down, but not as strong as the Dow Jones as well. So that's why the reason why I'm saying like there could be factors that could come in where we're still dragged to the upside regardless, even though the Dow Jones showing downside. Now in terms of 6 month, is showing bearish movement, so downside, so more of the short term versus the long term that I covered earlier with the 5 and 1, and then the 3 month trying to curve, and then the 1 month trying to curve as well. So potentially a little bit of the upside. Now this is more for hypothetically tomorrow's trading day, hypothetically, or not tomorrow, but like the next few days. But pretty much if we end up going higher, I think we pretty much go at the $535 price point. The only problem is the Nasdaq, Nvidia did spike it up a lot. So we closed at $529.83, and to spike it up, last time I checked the Fibonacci scale, it was about $538. So we could probably just break through this. So we had an upward trend resistance line. We broke through it a little bit, but you can see a couple times we got held underneath it. And if you think that tomorrow is going to be held underneath it, you're looking at pretty much $535 by the end of the day, trading day. It looks like, yeah, about a little bit, $535 and some change. That's the cap for tomorrow. And then within the next few trading days, it obviously will rise if you think it's going to keep going higher. But in terms of 535 and some change is the limit of this upward trend resistance line, and in terms of Fibonacci scale, it's $538 when I checked the last time. Now, in terms of the downside, we do have support at the $530 or $529 price point, as we saw today, plus colliding with moving averages. It collides at 530 and 528 and some change, so pretty much around the same ballpark. Now, I don't think necessarily we're going to go lower than the 527, which coincides right about here horizontally with this touch point, that touch point, with a little bit crossover with the moving average. But if you think it's going to be a down day tomorrow, which I personally don't think it is because Nvidia is pretty good, then we head down to the 525. There is support at the 525, but ultimately, if you're thinking it's going to head down, it would be probably dragging, I don't know. But yeah, 525 potentially bounce. But I think what's going to happen is within the next few trading days, we might be heading back down to the 520 to $22 price point range in terms of support, and then maybe the 520 to 519, 518 where we bounce off. You can see a bunch of times collide around here within this channel phase right here. So it's showing 519 to 522. So between that range, heading down there. But those will be personally not tomorrow. It would be more after tomorrow's trading day, in my opinion. If in terms of what I showed for the Dow Jones is correct in terms of my theory. Otherwise, it's just going to get pulled up. Now, the way it would get pulled up, in my opinion, though, is, for example, tomorrow's trading day is good because of NVIDIA and all that stuff, and then the tech sector hopefully gets pulled up. And if that's the case, and then the next trading day gets pulled up as well, is because the market doesn't care what the Fed stated, in my opinion. If the market just doesn't matter because they're still optimistic, thinking that, yeah, the Fed didn't eliminate the fact that there is not going to be an interest rate cut this year and that it's still possible, that is a possible viewpoint that could happen to head to the upside further. Would it be dramatic? I don't think it will be dramatic upsides personally. The only dramatic upside would be tomorrow, in my opinion. But there's that. Now, in terms of the reason why I think volatility is going to start happening soon to go to the upside. Oh, and then one thing actually before I get to the volatility, if you think we're just, not if you think, but in terms of the max level, by the way, just so you know, is right about here. I don't think we'll ever get there that quick, but right now we're looking at $627 to hit this upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. So $627, give or take. Again, the longer we take, the higher the high will be. So if we hit it here, we're looking at $645. But that will never happen straight up. So just to show you an upper limit for the time being. Now, in terms of VIX, like I stated, right now for the time being, volatility index is low. Once it starts rising, sell-off, in my opinion, from the way things work out, tend to happen. Now, the indications are kind of showing stagnant a little bit, and I think that's more predominantly for, like, for example, tomorrow and after tomorrow. But given in terms of next week, I think this volatility index could start rising It won't rise all the way to these levels right now. Right now we're at 12.3%, 12.3 points. But to get to what we just need basically is to start having the trickle effect of the downside, and then it could just start rising, for example, to 20 points, right? It doesn't necessarily need to shoot up to 80, 60, 70 points to see drop downs for the market. But yeah, again, I'm not necessarily like hoping that the markets crash or anything. I'm just saying that this is from the data I'm seeing in terms of the Dow Jones, especially for the Dow Jones showing the downside with the 30 stocks, large caps. I think that's what's going to happen, and this is just a theory. Now, in terms of Nasdaq for QQQ, just so that you know, in case you're a new viewer, upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010, so same as the S&P 500. And the only thing is the difference between this and the S&P 500 is it did have a breakout since 2020 to 2022, and then right about here, which reaffirms from what I showed, not reaffirms, but for the Dow Jones, like I said, we approached the limit and then heading down, but this one is getting close to the limit. So to me, potentially this is getting close to the limit. For Dow Jones, kind of indicating downside coming. More likely the case that, yeah, we might actually have, for example, almost NVIDIA kind of helps this to be fulfilled, where we'll hit this upward trend resistance line one more time, right, which is like, let's say tomorrow, and then start heading down, potentially, or the next 2 trading days, right? The markets could be carried for 2 trading days because of the positive output for tomorrow, and then the next day will be carried that positive output, hitting this upward trend resistance line. And sometimes it doesn't have to hit it exactly, because again, my lines are not perfect, but then start heading down with the Dow Jones, and then the S&P 500 obviously will be following the same narrative as all of them, because they pretty much are kind of correlated sometimes in terms of movement, not fully exactly, but some Nasdaq a little bit more volatile though. Now, in terms of the 5-year chart, shows the same thing basically as all of them, potentially crossing over to a bullish territory. Now, for the Nasdaq, it's the only one that isn't really necessarily arching down at all. So more of a reason why it's not guaranteed thesis that could be possible, that we're heading to the downside. But if you look at the 1-year chart, shows the same thing as the S&P 500. Yeah, potentially could be crossing down, but not as strong as the Dow Jones. So the S&P 500 and Nasdaq both don't necessarily show a downward trend trajectory fully for the 1 year, but the Dow Jones does show a little bit of a curve that's closer to going to the bearish movement, so indicating potential downside. And then, by the way, we're closed at $455.71, and after hours we're at $457. Again, carried by NVIDIA for the most part. Now, in terms of 6-month, 3-month, and 1 month, shows the same sentiment as the S&P 500. We have bearish movement for 6 month. Actually, a little bit altered, I guess, because it's more of the tech sector, because of NVIDIA too. So it's trying to arch up to the bullish movement. 3 month, same thing, I believe. Yeah, bullish movement, and 1 month bullish movement already crossed over. So yeah, more indication that it's tomorrow. Personally, it's going to be an update. Now, in terms of the overall movement, we have this horizontal resistance line. We have this upward trend resistance / support, resistance here, resistance, support, touch point, support, resistance, and then resistance a bunch of times. Now, in my opinion, I think we're going to head up anyway. If you think this upward trend resistance line is going to be coming into play the next couple of days, which potentially could, which supports that thesis that I mentioned earlier, hits that resistance line, and then comes back down with in sync of the Dow Jones hypothetically, then you're looking at right now, give or take ballpark, about $465, $464, some change around that range, right? Now, I don't know if that's necessarily going to hit tomorrow, but that would be in the next few trading days, give or take. So $465 almost. Now, in terms of just the Fibonacci scale, when I checked it, it was 458, 459. I don't know if the Fibonacci scale is going to play it out for this one personally, because yeah, it's debatable. But to the downside, the 460, by the way, also will count as resistance. These clean numbers, 460 and all stuff, just the pure clean numbers, that will act as resistance. But then ultimately, the next maybe 2 trading days will end up hitting the 465. If you're optimistic that NVIDIA, with tomorrow being carrying the markets, that whole momentum will carry over the next trading day as well. Now, to the downside, though, we're going to end up seeing support at, I think, most likely moving averages, because you can see horizontally right about here, it bounces off as resistance, but then a bunch of times consolidates right about here. So with that moving average, I think will hold true. About $454, give or take some change around that ballpark. As we saw pretty much today, there's nonstop around 454. Then about $452, about this moving average, which bounces off right about here as a support, and here as well. So $452 and some change. And then ultimately, I think we would see a good amount of support with upward trend resistance / support line plus horizontal resistance line that could act as support, which coincides with this moving average around the ballparks of $448 and $447 and $446. So about between a channel of $446 to $448, give or take, bounce around these levels, in my opinion, pretty much for sure, unless it goes to, maybe dips to the 445 and some change a little bit on the high side. But I don't think we're going to go lower until after tomorrow's trading day or the day after, depending on the momentum overall. Then we're going to start heading down. But what could most likely happen, because the market's going to be carried, we could see in the next 2 days end up hitting the limit 465, maybe some change, because 465 and 8 cents, give or take, and then start heading down, fulfilling, for example, what I showed in the Dow Jones and for the Nasdaq dating back since 2010 upward trend resistance line. But that's basically it for today's video. I believe I covered everything. If you have any questions, comment down below. I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate it. If you found value in the video, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel, so thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. And thanks again for watching on X and YouTube. If you do want to be notified when I do upload my next videos, consider following so be notified when I do upload the next video. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.